of you. We are delighted that there is so much interest in, first of all, our forums generally, but particularly today, given our agenda items. So today we're going to cover the results of the 2026 Record-Keeping Monitoring Exercise, and I'll hand over to my colleague Joe Carlos in a few moments. We will then be hearing about the verification process, which was a new feature of our process this year. We'll then be going on to general updates from State Records New South Wales and updates from Museums of History New South Wales. So it will be quite an action-packed forum this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're all meeting today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. All right, without further ado, I will hand over to our wonderful project officer in State Records New South Wales, Joanne Carlos, to present us with the results of the 2026 RME. Jo, over to you.
Thanks, Martyn, and good morning, everyone. So first and foremost, thank you all for participating in the 2026 Record-Keeping Monitoring Exercise. We appreciate your efforts in completing the RMAT and in meeting the new requirements that we've introduced this year. Before I dive into results, I'd just like to mention that much of what I'll be discussing this morning will be available in our State of Record Keeping in New South Wales report, which will be published on our website by the end of the week. Most of this presentation is quite data heavy, so there's a lot of numbers and charts, but the latter part will also focus a lot more on the qualitative insights that we've gained. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we will get to them at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So, the monitoring exercise has now been running for 4 years using the Records Management Assessment Tool, or the RMAT, which was revised last year to align with the revised standards. If you recall, there was no major changes to any of the 19 questions. It was mostly refining some of the wording to align with the scope of the standards. We did, however, seek to strengthen confidence and trust in the results of the monitoring exercise itself, and we did this by introducing some new assurance measures this year. These included a new question in the 2026 RMAT covering the accuracy of your submission and its approval by your Chief Executive, a check of each submission to confirm that you had identified evidence for each question, and a verification process. Now, Laura is going to speak in detail on the verification process and our findings, so I will leave that in her very capable hands. Regarding the first two measures, next slide, please. As you're all aware, there was a new mandatory question in the preliminary section of the RMAT, which is linked to the overarching duty that each Chief Executive has under the Act to ensure compliance. The monitoring exercise itself is a self-assessment, and the new question is really designed to add rigour and trustworthiness around the information that you reported. 318 or 99% of participating public officers advised us that the assessment was accurate and had been approved or endorsed by the Chief Executive or equivalent. This question did have an impact. We had a significant number of requests for extensions to the RME deadline, more than we've ever had before. And the majority of requests cited delays with obtaining senior executive approval of the submission. Since the RMAT is an evidence-based self-assessment, identifying evidence to support your selected maturity levels or response to a question enables you to justify your assessment to an internal auditor, the Audit and Risk Committee, or any oversight agency such as the Audit Office. To reinforce this, we did check every submission to confirm that you had identified evidence as part of your responses. Only 25 public officers had not identified evidence for any or the majority of the 19 questions, and when contacted, 19 of these public officers did provide us with further information. Throughout this evidence check, we noticed that many public officers either provided descriptions of the evidence or processes they had relied upon instead of identifying or naming specific documents, processes, or systems, or that they had just copied the items we listed as examples of evidence in the Word or Excel version of the RMAT or in the RMAT guide. We will be looking to improve the robustness of evidence through our targeted guidance activities and the information that we provide for the next monitoring exercise. Next slide, please. I'm pleased to say that this year we saw a notable increase in participation, receiving 321 submissions, which is 32 submissions more than in 2024. This is a response rate of 85% of the jurisdiction, up from 77% or 289 submissions in the previous monitoring exercise. Within that uplift, we saw several public officers participate in the monitoring exercise for the very first time, namely from agencies, authorities and departments, local government councils, as well as from courts and tribunals who made their monitoring exercise debut in 2026. On the slide, on the right-hand side is a breakdown of participation by public office type for your reference. I'd also like to note that 27 public officers were covered in another public officer's submission, likely that of their principal or parent department. And 11 public officers were excused from the monitoring exercise due to either Part 2 of the State Records Act not applying to them, the public office being an intergovernmental body, or the public office being granted an exemption due to special circumstances. There are also 20 public officers, which is roughly equivalent to 5% of the jurisdiction, who did not make a submission in 2026. And 3 of them have not participated in any of the 4 monitoring exercises. Before I move on to our actual performance, I would like to mention that this year we have given a stronger emphasis to the compliance aspect of our results. As you're familiar with, each question in the RMAT is linked and mapped to the requirements of the State Records Act, the State Records Regulation, and the mandatory standards issued under the Act. Baseline compliance with those requirements is represented by a level 3 out of 5. So by averaging responses, we obtain the overall maturity score for each public office or public office type, or even for the jurisdiction as a whole. With that said, I will be mentioning both maturity scores and compliance rates going forward. I think it's also important to remember that our jurisdiction is made up of 379 public offices of differing sizes across different geographical locations, and therefore with differing records management capacity and capability. And all of this plays a huge part in overall maturity and compliance. So, if we could skip back to the slide before this one, thank you. So, how did the jurisdiction actually perform? The overall records management maturity score for 2026 is 2.94 out of 5, which is a marginal increase from 2.93 in 2024. Considering that this score is an average of all public office scores across all 19 questions of the RMAT, this metric shows us that both maturity and compliance effort has remained steady despite the increase in participation compared to 2024. If we look at the number of responses that were compliant, So that is those public officers scoring a level 3, 4 or 5 across all questions, then we get an overall compliance rate of 69.85% for the jurisdiction in 2026. Again, also a marginal increase from 68.57% in 2024, but it's certainly a material improvement on the rate of 62.31% in 2023. As you know, we had a planning year in 2025 to allow public officers time to adjust to the revised standards and to progress any internal improvement programs. After this first cycle, the impact of the switch to biannual monitoring exercises is not necessarily clear-cut. A range of factors may have contributed to the stable results, chief among them greater participation and the introduction of the new assurance measures. Next slide, please. In our State of Record Keeping report, we always look at the spread of maturity scores for the jurisdiction. So we can see in the table what's happening. There has been no increase in the number of public officers scoring in the level 4 band. That has stayed static. There has been a very small increase in the number of public officers scoring in the level 1 band, but activity has mostly been in the level 2 and level 3 bands, which have both increased, and we attribute this to the greater number of participants in this year's monitoring exercise. The fact that there has been no increase in the level 4 band suggests that there may have been a more conservative approach to scoring this year, again, keeping in mind the context of the new assurance measures. Next slide, please. In front of us is the spread of overall maturity scores by public office type over the last 3 monitoring exercises. Usually there is a steady increase among all public office types, but in 2026, progress has been quite mixed. Agencies, authorities and departments and local health districts have all increased, while local government councils, state-owned corporations and universities have decreased. Courts and tribunals, as a distinct public office type, debuted with an overall maturity score of 3.08. Next slide, please. In terms of the 3 categories that the 19 questions of the RMAT are divided into, people and governance, which comprises questions 1 to 9, and information management, questions 15 to 19, have seen slight improvements in terms of overall average maturity. However, systems and business, which covers questions 10 to 14, has decreased in overall average maturity compared to 2024. Next slide, please. Now we come to the results of the questions themselves. The line graph on the slide shows the changes in average maturity scores for the whole jurisdiction over the last few years. 2026 results are in purple. In general, there has been slight increases in the scores for 9 questions, a decrease in the scores for 7 questions, and scores for the other 3 questions remaining the same. Next slide, please. Our top performing questions are around create, collect, capture, record storage, and systems design. And conversely, our lowest performing questions are related to transfer, performance monitoring, and retention and disposal. In terms of compliance rates, we are improving when it comes to records and information management responsibilities, outsourcing and contracts, and transfer. But we saw a material decrease around high risk and high value business and systems, information risk, and access directions. We will certainly be looking at these questions and your responses to inform the kind of guidance and support that we plan to roll out in this new financial year, as well as ahead of the next monitoring exercise. Next slide, please. So, as much as we rely on data and statistics, the comments or the qualitative information provided in submissions have given us some truly valuable insights into the state of record keeping beyond just the numbers. Consistent with the spread of scores that I've just outlined, the comments suggest some really pleasing progress in many areas, as well as areas needing additional effort that will be a focus for our future guidance and support. So I'll now run through some of the key points. Many of you have developed or are developing information asset registers, and we're happy to see this moving since this work is critical, not just for responding to the RMAT, but also in strategic planning and for identifying priorities. Identifying management of high risk and high value records, information and data is intertwined with cybersecurity attestation, disaster management, business continuity and risk management planning. Some of you are engaging with internal audit and risk committees or establishing information governance groups. Organisational shifts have started to occur to elevate record keeping as a core governance priority, with some of you reporting increased executive awareness of records and information management. This is a fantastic win in our eyes. We hope as well that the monitoring exercise and our new assurance measures have also helped in raising visibility. For some of you, records management is a component of your organisation's overall strategic ICT or data model. A few of you have identified the lack of a formalised or consolidated standalone strategy for records and information management as a gap that needs to be improved. The majority of you have an endorsed and published records and information management policy in place, with some in the process of developing, reviewing or updating that policy. And some of the key drivers leading this include accommodating changes to digital technologies, cybersecurity requirements and privacy requirements. We're also glad to know that staff in nearly all public offices are aware of their record-keeping responsibilities to some extent, with many of you having built these responsibilities into policy, plans, asset registers, position descriptions, and performance plans. We note that ongoing training to reinforce record-keeping awareness for staff is usually offered in an ad hoc manner or through self-paced online learning, including modules provided by us at State Records. Some of you identified contractors as a weakness in your training programs. Interestingly, records champions are being appointed in some of your organisations, and kudos to any champions who may be in attendance today. We would love to hear from you about your role and your experiences. Thanks to most of you, the majority of public offices have qualified and experienced records and information management staff, or at least access to skilled staff. For other public offices, capability across the organisation leans towards technical expertise rather than formally recognised records management experience. However, despite having capability in this sense, capacity is a different matter, resourcing, of course, being the ever-present barrier and challenge. We note that as a solution, some of you are turning to external support to supplement internal capacity, either from your parent department or from contracted professional services. For many of you, connection with professional associations and agencies is important for networking, professional development, training opportunities, and getting industry updates. Next slide, please. In terms of contracts for outsourced services, approaches around incorporating or monitoring record-keeping requirements are generally not standardised or consistent, with clauses being generic. We understand now that if record-keeping requirements are specified, it's likely for high-risk areas and for emerging technologies like AI. We're also aware that for some of you, oversight of contracts is entirely out of your control and that you're required to use standard organisational, departmental, or whole of government templates. When it comes to monitoring, most of your performance monitoring is around systems and data quality. Some of you do not have the monitoring program at all, and so completing the RMAT is the only form of monitoring you undertake alongside other mandatory statutory reporting. If there is monitoring happening, it usually occurs in an ad hoc manner, often in response to issues such as non-compliance that is picked up during other business activities. On the upside, there are several of you who have already or are planning to undertake external audits of records and information management activities. Security and protection of records, information and data is an area that is performing well due to both A, the work that you already complete to meet cybersecurity requirements and to respond to data breaches, and B, the security measures in place by your approved off-site or commercial storage providers. We also acknowledge that many of you are concerned about the risk around unmanaged information held outside of approved record-keeping systems, with the quantity of this information sometimes being quite voluminous. We're glad to know that for the majority of you, most records and information can be searched and found relatively easily, especially through your EDRMS. Historical records, however, are a bit more of a challenge, especially if they're held across multiple legacy systems and environments, which can also tie into the over-retention of records. Some of you are undertaking digitisation projects, sentencing hard copy records, or even completing an audit to help assess your records holdings, all of which I think have a flow-on effect towards reducing storage costs while also improving discoverability. Despite the highly digital environment that we work in, I don't think it'll come as a surprise that physical records dominate destruction programs and schedules. Very little digital disposal is actually occurring. And speaking of disposal, while many of you have submitted transfer plans to Museums of History New South Wales, transfers in general have been limited, ad hoc, or yet to occur. We also know that barriers to transfer include limited resourcing, other record-keeping priorities, no developed processes to enable transfer, the relative youth of some public offices, and records required as state archives still being in regular business use. Now, I know that was a lot of information, and there's even more in the State of Record Keeping in New South Wales report. I hope that by having shared all of this, that you understand better where record keeping is sitting in our jurisdiction, at the aggregate level at least, and that you are not alone in your experiences, whether that's your progress or in the challenges that you face. We will be looking at all of these results, the numbers, the comments, the evidence, to help understand how we can assist you throughout 26 and 27. Next slide, please. So the next record keeping monitoring exercise will be held in 2028. And just a reminder, we will be providing you all with your individual scorecards soon. They will be released in early August, not the end of this month or this week. We do apologise for that slight miscommunication. So if there have been any recent changes to your chief executive or your senior responsible officer, please do email us at GovRec with their contact details and position title if relevant. I'd also just like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues for all of their work and support throughout this exercise. The record keeping monitoring exercise is our juggernaut, and we appreciate all the hands on deck who help make this possible and run as smoothly as it can. So it's now time for any questions. So I would like to invite Catherine and Stephen to join in. If there are any questions around verification, we may leave that for after Laura's presentation if they aren't already covered by the content that she will deliver.
So thank you very much for that presentation. I think that shows, as you said, I like the term juggernaut, that is the RME, but also the depth of knowledge and intelligence that this exercise gives to us in respect of record keeping and records management across the sector, and your own depth of knowledge was very evident from that presentation. So thank you, and I'd also like to echo your comments about the rest of the State Records small but perfectly formed team who have got these results together in a very easily able to be communicated way. So thank you so much. We have online 383 people. So inevitably, we're not going to perhaps get to all of the questions or comments that people may have, but I would like to encourage anyone who would like to provide any feedback to us at State Records about the RMAT, the record keeping monitoring exercise and so on, please do contact us around that. It will be 2 years before we do the exercise again, as Joe has said, and for us to be able to build in your feedback and comments in preparation for that exercise will be incredibly valuable. So please do contact us. Brickbats or bouquets, please do contact us. All right. Are there any questions or comments? I noticed Peter had his hand up earlier, but has put it down. So I hope that's not as a result of anything I said, Peter. But does anyone else have any comments or questions before we move on to our next agenda item? Going. All right. As I said, if you, as a result of the presentation, get some sort of inspiration to contact us, please do. All right, Joe, thank you again for the presentation. Much appreciated. And let's move on to our next agenda item. As Joe mentioned, verification was part of the 2026 RME process. And so what we'd like to do now is present to you about that verification process, how we went about it, what our findings were. And I'll hand over to Laura Baldwin, who's our Manager of Policy and Advice at State Records, and Laura will then guide us through the rest of the Record Managers Forum as well. So Laura, over to you, please.
Thank you, Martyn. We've actually just noticed that there is a question in the chat. So I wonder, Joe, would you be happy to respond to that one before I continue with the verification process? So there's a question from Ron Holler, which just says, can you provide examples of good monitoring regimes?
Certainly. So, Ron, we do have a particular set of guidance available on our website at the moment, and there are a range of different monitoring programs or processes that you can follow. Perhaps I won't mention on screen those exact processes and types of monitoring, but happy to take this question offline if that's a better way of approaching or answering your question.
And perhaps if we could provide some links to the guidance on our website, Joe or one of our other colleagues,
yes,
for the benefit of everyone in the meeting today, that would be good.
Can do that.
Great, thank you.
I will continue now.
Laura, over to you. Yep, thank you.
No worries. Thanks so much, Martyn. So just a reminder, if anyone does have any questions or comments, there is a Q&A function. There's also the chat, so you're welcome to use either of those to put in any comments while I'm talking, and then we can respond to those at the end as well. So as Martyn said, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Baldwin. I'm the Manager Policy and Advice with State Records New South Wales. I'd like to add my welcome to that welcome that you've already received from Martyn, and also acknowledge the traditional lands that I'm coming from today, the lands of the Dharawal people. As Joanne already highlighted, one of the significant developments in the 2026 record keeping monitoring exercise was the introduction of the verification process. For the first time, State Records New South Wales undertook a risk-based verification of a sample of submissions. The purpose was not to audit public officers nor to identify poor performers. Instead, it was to better understand how organisations interpret the Records Management Assessment Tool, or RMAT, what evidence they rely on, and how confident we can be in the results that underpin the State of Record Keeping in New South Wales report that Jo just spoke to. The verification exercise has provided valuable insights into record-keeping maturity across the jurisdiction and, importantly, highlighted practical opportunities to strengthen record-keeping programs. Verification should really be seen as an opportunity for both the participating agencies and for State Records New South Wales. It allows us both to improve our approach to the record-keeping monitoring exercise and in our response by public officers, in the way we're supporting public officers to respond. Before we move any further, I just really want to thank the participating public officers for their cooperation in the pilot of this verification process. Okay, next slide. So we had 10 public officers who were selected for verification in 2026. The sampling approach was designed to achieve diversity across public office characteristics rather than statistical representation. We do recognise that 10 out of 321 participating public officers is not a large percentage, but this was a pilot year. We really wanted to understand whether challenges were consistent across sectors and sizes, and whether public officers with higher self-reported maturity and lower self-reported maturity faced similar issues. The next slide addresses the questions that we looked at. So we selected 3 questions to assess. These are on the screen at the moment. Question 4, which is about records and information management strategies. Question 12, which is about quality records and information, and question 17, which is about retention and disposal. These questions were drawn from each of the following categories. Question 4 was from people and governance, question 12 was from systems and business, and question 17 was from information management. These questions were selected because they typically had a lower rate of compliance, and preliminary reviews of the types of evidence listed for submissions suggested that there may be some concerns. The next slide then addresses the process that we followed. So each public office was asked to provide copies of evidence to support their maturity scores for questions 4, 12 and 17. We completed a desktop review of the documents provided, which was over 250 individual documents. I would like to thank Catherine for her work in working through those documents. We reviewed the evidence against the criteria for selected maturity levels and produced a report for each public office, which contained a finding of whether the evidence supported the maturity level selected and information about opportunities to strengthen the evidence and links to online guidance. We shared the draft verification reports with the senior responsible officer and records contacts for each public office to give them an opportunity to provide any additional information that could address identified gaps. Some public officers did send through additional documents, and others accepted the findings as they were. Any additional evidence provided was reviewed in the same way as before with the desktop verification, and where appropriate, verification reports were updated to reflect the new information. The verification reports were then finalised, and they will be sent to Chief Executive Officers with senior responsible officers copied in alongside the scorecards very soon. As I mentioned before, the scorecards contain guidance and suggestions where appropriate, because our intention really is to support public officers in improving their records management maturity and compliance. This wasn't just a pass or fail exercise. Even in instances where we found that the evidence did not support the maturity level selected, maturity scores were not changed as a result of this process. The next slide addresses results. So encouragingly, we found that most public officers did provide sufficient evidence to support the maturity level selected. Most differences arose not because organisations intentionally misrepresented their record-keeping maturity, but because they interpreted either the maturity criteria or the evidence requirements differently from how we interpret them or intended them to be interpreted at State Records New South Wales. We made 7 findings based on the verification process, which will inform our work ahead of the next record-keeping monitoring exercise in 2028. So on to our findings. Our first finding, number 1, was a lack of strategy or roadmap. We found that a number of public officers did not have a dedicated records and information management strategy. Some public officers relied on a single statement within a policy document which indicated a commitment in principle to ongoing improvement, but they didn't have a document that outlined specific targets and a roadmap. In assessing evidence for question 4 specifically, we realised that we need to add additional guidance on our own website on developing records and information management strategies, so this work will be prioritised in the following year. The second finding was around a lack of documentation of key records management processes and practices. We found that some public officers didn't have documentation to support some processes and practices, especially as they relate to disposal and quality records and information. In some instances, the processes themselves were actually established, but just not documented. Documentation is essential for transparency and accountability, and also ensures that other people in the organisation are aware of the correct processes. And of course, a lot of us here are records managers, and we understand the importance of good records. The third finding is around meeting business needs and user expectations for records and information. Some public officers were unable to provide evidence that demonstrated that they had identified and addressed business and user needs for records. Anecdotally, we also found that some public officers were unsure how to even go about this process. Usually, this would be done through system audits or user surveys. Understanding business and user needs allows the records management program to be much more responsive and effective. The fourth finding was on selecting an incorrect or unsupported maturity level. Some public officers did not provide evidence to meet all the criteria for a particular maturity level. The way the RMAT is designed is that there are often multiple criteria for each maturity level. Often each sentence has its own criteria. In order to provide sufficient evidence for a maturity level, you would have to provide evidence to support each criterion. For example, maturity level 2 for question 4, which is on the screen now, requires in the first sentence that there is planning underway to develop a records and information management strategy and align it with the organisation's strategic plan. And secondly, that there is some support from senior management. This evidence could be found in the same document. Maybe you have an endorsed plan to develop a strategy. It could also be found in multiple documents. So it's really important when looking at which evidence you need to support your submission that you carefully read the maturity level selected and ensure that you have evidence to meet each aspect of the maturity level. We also found that some public officers didn't recognise that the RMAT tends to follow a nested structure. So, for example, in question 4, again, still on the screen, level 2, as we just said, requires evidence of developing a strategy. Level 3 requires that an established and endorsed strategy exists. And then level 4 assumes that there is already that established and endorsed strategy, and it looks to see that that strategy is better integrated across other areas of business. We recognise that we still do need to consider the design of the RMAT to ensure that it is clearer for public officers to understand and apply. The fifth finding was around the reliance on different evidence. We found that when we requested copies of evidence for verification, some public officers provided evidence that was different to the evidence identified in their RME submission. We recognised that a few months did pass between submission and verification, so there may have been some updates, for example, a new disposal procedure approved. However, this didn't seem to be the case in most instances. And the discrepancy does raise some questions about the relevance of evidence that would have been identified for other questions. The verification process also allowed for public officers to provide additional information in response to their draft verification report. Obviously, that additional information wouldn't have been listed in their original submission. Finding number 6 is about the accuracy and currency of evidence. Some public officers provided evidence that was overdue for review or included incorrect information. Each public office should have a review schedule for key governance documents, such as your records management policy. We don't have specific guidance about the frequency of reviews. However, I would suggest that between 2 and 5 years is generally appropriate to ensure currency. Some documents provided also referenced superseded disposal authorities or criteria relevant to other Australian jurisdictions and not to New South Wales. It's really important that all documentation is accurate and fit for purpose. The last finding, finding number 7, was on the relevance of evidence. We found that a number of public officers provided documents that just weren't relevant to support the maturity level selected. It appears that some public officers took the approach of sharing everything just to make sure that they didn't miss out on anything, rather than carefully reading the criteria for the maturity level selected and then only providing the documents that support those. You may remember me noting earlier that we received over 250 documents. That means, on average, we received 8 documents per public office per question, which is typically way more than necessary. All right, in terms of next steps, as a result of this verification process, we have identified a number of next steps, which of course align with the overall next steps identified from the 2026 Recordkeeping Monitoring Exercise as a whole. We will review and develop additional guidance, and this includes guidance on records and information management strategies that I identified earlier. We will also consider the design of the RMAT to make sure that it is easier for public officers to understand how to complete it accurately. We'll also need to consider how verification can be extended for the monitoring exercise in 2028. We recommend that public officers also take time before the 2028 RME to review the evidence listed in your 2026 submission and see whether it supports the maturity level selected. We also recommend developing an inventory of evidence used for RME submissions. There's an example template in the RMAT guide, which is on our website. An inventory allows you to keep track of key documents, to track their review dates, and to easily locate the key documents as required. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank you again for all the participating public officers. We really hope that this process has been beneficial for you and that the learnings from this process are beneficial to all public officers going forward. I'm now happy to look at questions. So I can see one hand is up. I don't know if we're actually able to unmute, so maybe have a go and see if you can unmute. I can't see a name. Jay, I think it is. Are you able to unmute? If not, I will just go to the questions that are in the chat. I might go to the questions in the chat. Okay, so the first one I can see is for reporting reasons, knowledge of league table by end of July would be handy. Is early access available? So if this is related to the state of record keeping, that report will be published online by the end of the week. If this is reference to scorecards specifically, then I believe the target date is next week. I'm not sure if I've answered that question correctly. Please feel free to respond.
Laura,
yeah.
Yes, no, I'd actually put an answer to Colin's question into the chat. So exactly that, yes.
Perfect. Okay, I'll move to Kay's.
And Jay, you put your hand up. I changed the controls to allow people to unmute themselves. So hopefully you can now unmute yourself and speak.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, while we're waiting, so if anyone does want to ask a question verbally, feel free to raise your hand and I can come back to you. Kay has written a comment regarding the next RMA due in 2028. Will it be scheduled for August to align with the timing of the RMA 2026 scorecards being received?
Kay, I think we're still aiming for the March timing for RMEs. Just, I mean, we picked that deliberately to fit in with the sort of government.
Right, so when you say the families, okay, and they've told you to tell me.
Sorry, I think someone might have their microphone on. Wasn't intending it. Sorry, Kay, did you hear my answer there?
I did. March 2028. Yep, thank you.
That's right. Thanks, Kay.
Wonderful. I can see another question from Kathy, which is overall, did agencies underestimate or overestimate maturity that went through verification? I would, overall, people probably overestimated. But again, if we think about what I covered in the presentation, it didn't appear to be an intentional thing. It was just not necessarily having the documents to meet all criteria for the maturity level selected. And so in some instances, even though initially we found that they didn't meet all the criteria, when we asked for additional evidence, they were then able to meet all the criteria. I can see a request about Sharon. So this is just a comment on the design of the RMAT. So thank you. We'll definitely take that on board in thinking about how to redesign the tool going forward. I'm going to move over to the Q&A now. Is there anything additional? Not that I can see. Okay, Cheryl.
Just a comment. There's a big gap between the maturity score 1 and 2. Is there any thought to having a sort of 1.5, if you like? Because 1 is basically nothing is happening and 2 is something is happening, but that can be quite a big leap.
We're still at quite early stages of thinking about the redesign of the RMAT, so I don't know that that's specifically been considered, but we can definitely take it on board. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? All right, let's leave it there then, but please continue to put any other comments or questions into the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll circle back to that. But I would now like to hand over to Rianna, who is a project officer with State Records New South Wales, to provide some updates from State Records New South Wales. Thanks, Rianna.
Good morning all. My name's Rianna, I'm a project officer, as Laura said. So I'm just going to talk about a couple little other updates that we've been doing other than the lovely RME. So next slide, please. So we've had some new guidance recently produced for our website. So we've been sending these through on the For the Record newsletter, but some will be coming out in the next For the Record newsletter as well. So specifically, we've been looking at records management systems. So we've had some guidance created on EDRMSs specifically, and we have noticed that agencies are considering using productivity platforms like M365 as record management systems. So we've created some guidance to specifically address the use of these and the risk of using these platforms as records management systems. So you're more than welcome to jump on and have a look at that. Other new pieces of guidance includes record keeping in ICT. So we're specifically trying to provide some guidance between building the gap between technology teams and records teams, providing guidance on how to consider and address records management as part of system lifecycle management, and also the foundational concepts of data governance versus information and records management, and also how they intersect. And finally, we've also done some updates on our checklist for assessing business systems for record keeping functionality. So this is now, it used to be an Excel document, it's now a Word document, and has been updated to reflect a bit more the modern record keeping that's going on. So it's been updated to help identify whether systems meet required record keeping standards, if further action is needed to address any gaps in these systems. It is a template and it can be changed to suit your agency's need, and it can be used at any stage of implementation, review of a system, etc. And another piece of guidance as well is we often offer a solution that, say, when we have people inquire to say you should undertake a risk assessment. So we've actually provided some guidance a bit more on how you can do a risk assessment for record keeping practices. And it will just give you a bit more information on how to use these risk assessments in record keeping decisions. Next slide, please. So we've also updated some guidance. So the previous slide was new guidance that we've created from scratch. The next one is we've just updated some of our guidance. In particular, our digitisation pages. We are aware that before, I think it was about 26 separate pages. It's now been summarised, and pieces of duplication have been removed. So it's now 7 pages. So it should be a lot easier to read going forward for you guys. And there's some other pages that we've also just done a quick review and update to make sure that it meets current standards. So next slide, please. I'm also just giving a quick update that we do have the 12 e-learning modules on our website. These can be undertaken by anyone interested in improving their record keeping knowledge. We particularly like to encourage uptake of these. We do have the distributed SCORM files that can be uploaded to your agency's learning management systems. And even if you don't want to go that way, you can still have anyone log in and undertake these. So we really encourage them for everyone just to have a look and play with. Next one, thank you. Finally, just wanted to do a little reminder of the notification of damaged or destroyed records. Under the State Records Act, we all have an obligation to ensure digital and physical records aren't damaged or neglected. So if you do find any records that have been damaged or destroyed, you do have a requirement to notify us when this has been identified. So along with physical records that have been damaged by disaster like fire or flood, the notification also includes digital records that have been destroyed, deleted, or altered before minimum retention periods are met, or if the integrity of the record has been impacted. So this could be through legacy systems that are no longer accessible, through a data breach or a cyber event. So we do require notification if those occur. But notification can just be sent through with detailing the circumstance and the records affected to GovRec. So we'd also like to note as part of this notification that if hard copy records are affected by mould, please feel free to contact us, as we can provide guidance on remediation steps, or we can even put you in touch with conservators at Museums of History for State Archives records that have been affected by mould. And just also note that if damaged records are identified, public officers must not dispose of any records that are state archives or that haven't met their minimum retention requirements before notifying us. And that way we can provide guidance on next steps. So yeah, that's just my little update. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rianna. I'm just going back to the comments to see if we have anything. I can see one person has asked about whether we have any other training resources with regard to FA 450 other than the online training module. I can see that Angela has already just encouraged them to reach out to GovRec. So if you are in that position, maybe please reach out to GovRec, which is our standard email address for advice if you do want to have any discussions about that. Thanks so much also, Rianna, for putting all the links to the guidance in the chat. There was also a comment earlier, which I didn't respond to at the time, from, apologies if I mispronounce your name, but from Kush, which I know Catherine has responded to. I just wanted to reiterate, if you didn't provide any evidence in your RMAT submission, your RME submission, sorry, you would have received contact from the State Records team just asking if you could provide a list of evidence to support your submission. But when it comes to the actual verification, it was just a pilot. It was a sample of public officers. So we didn't target public officers who we thought we were doing a horrible job or anything like that. We were trying to get a representative group. So if you weren't targeted for verification, it doesn't mean anything. Equally, if you were targeted, again, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just to have a representative sample there. Please just, when your scorecard comes out, have a good look at that. Think about where you're sitting, because that will show you where you are compared to the sector and the jurisdiction. So you can see how you're performing, and also just consider if you have any questions that you're currently scoring below a 3, that means that you're currently not compliant with the requirements of the State Records Act and the standards. So please consider that as well. I can't, oh wait, do we have anything else in questions? Right, I can see there's a question about a link to the new guidance, but I'm aware that that's been posted in the chat, so hopefully you found that. I think we're good now to hand over to Allison, who is an officer with the Agency Services of Museums of History New South Wales, for an update. Thanks, Allison.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you. The insights of the findings and your next steps was really, really interesting. And I think will just strengthen the whole process and just make the whole RMAT more meaningful, impactful over time. So yeah, it's a huge body of work by everyone, as well as everyone contributing online. So that's wonderful, and thank you to everyone who's spoken before me today. Good morning, my name's Allison, and yes, I'm an officer in the Agency Services team at the Museums of History New South Wales, and I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm talking to you today from Darug Country. I'm here just to talk to you about the role of agency services and how we can support you in your work in managing records required at State Archives, transferring them to the custody of the State Archives collection. Our senior advisor, Christy Tagviri, is on the chat. So if you have questions that come up as I'm talking, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we will respond. And if we don't get to all the questions today during the course of this forum, I will we'll make sure to respond to you in due course after the forum. One of the bodies of work that we've been focusing on this year, and really has been Christy's body of work, has been reviewing and assessing the transfer plans that were recently submitted over the last 12 months due to a new legislative requirement for public officers to submit transfer plans to lay out their planned activities for records that they hold that are required as a state archive, and planning that transfer over time into the custody of the State Archives collection. What we have been doing is reaching out to people who perhaps had said or flagged in the plan that they had by now just planned to transfer these records to our custody, but haven't yet done so. And what we're reaching out to do is just see how we can support you in proceeding with that transfer and see if there are any blockers that we can help with. So it's important to note that just submitting a transfer plan to the Museums of History about your state archives is not the same as actually beginning that transfer process. And so that's why we're reaching out, just to make sure that people know that and have the support that they need. For many agencies, that process of transferring records required as a state archive into our custody can feel complex, it can feel daunting, and perhaps it can also feel very resource intensive. So me and my team here at the Agency Services, we're here to provide practical advice on what you need to do to really get that process started. How we provide that support is that we can come and visit you if it's practical to do so. We do a lot of Teams chats, so you get to see our faces. We can demonstrate the portal. We can provide you with all the templates that you need and answer any questions that you have. We also are very welcome to hosting people to come and visit us here at the Western Sydney Record Centre, so you can see what's happening with your physical records and where they go once they have been transferred. So when I talk about physical transfers, we can provide advice about creating consignment lists, packing, labelling records, and also supporting their future access. These physical records may include paper files, registers, volumes, plans, photographs, audiovisual material, and other paper-based records. When you're preparing these records for transfer, you need to consider if the records are eligible for permanent retention, and then if they're arranged and packed appropriately for ongoing retention and access and discoverability. And this is what my team helps you to do. We also have seen over the last few years a gradual but steady increase in the transfer of digital records. And in fact, last financial year, we reached our first and highest rate of 20% of our consignments that were received as a transfer were in a digital format. So we are the same team that can help you to prepare digital records for transfer, whether they be from unstructured electronic documents to more systems, databases, shared drives, and other business applications. In regards to digital transfers, what we find, because you're often working with other members of your offices, including ICT, the earlier you contact us if you are thinking about or starting to prepare a digital transfer, the easier that process can be. We can talk you through metadata exports and extractions and what's required, and also some very practical advice about, for example, just how to get the data to us. We're the people to ask those questions and we're the people that can help. Another body of work that agency services can assist you with is registering and managing your access directions. So records, all records, but specifically as the state of records required as a state archive, will be accessed by future researchers. And to manage that process, we also manage the access direction register. All of that can be managed in the service portal under access directions. Closed directions do have a lifespan of 5 years, and at the end of that 5 years need to be reviewed. And there is a section in the service portal where any access directions you may have coming up to an expiry term will come up in a list. You can then look at those access directions, see if they're still fit for purpose, and you can review them, renew them, or revoke and register new and applicable access directions if required. Overall, agency services are here to support you. So you can tell us what you need from us and we will be there. We guide you through practical steps so that you can meet your legislative obligations in terms of managing your records that are required for state archives. We aim to help agencies meet those responsibilities with confidence and ensure that your records of enduring value are preserved and become part of the State Archives collection. Thank you for your time today. As I said, if there's lots of questions coming through, that's absolutely fine. Christy's there to help, as are we. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. I can see some comments in the chat just about how helpful the support from the agency services team is when it comes to transfers. So that's really wonderful to read. I'll just hand over briefly to Stephen Powder, who's the other manager at State Records New South Wales, just to respond to a few more of the comments.
Well, thanks, Laura. I really just want to say thank you to Kate Kerr for her comment, giving her thanks to the team who worked on the RME. I'd really like to add my thanks too, because I've been away, as some of you might have noticed, on secondment for about 8 months, and I've come back at the end of this massive process and just, you know, in awe of the work that Joe and Catherine and the rest of the team have got through, and Laura's work particularly on the verification process. I was hanging out with Ross Hanson at Primary Industry, so it was great to be embedded and have some good record keeping chats about challenges over there. Just one other sort of to underscore something that Joe's already touched on, with the switch to the biennial record keeping monitoring exercise, the coming year will be a year of targeted support and guidance. So having sort of pulled all the information together and started to sift through the insights, we'll be using that to shape up the program of support and guidance. And, you know, Rianna's already given you some insights into the additional guidance, but there'll be more to come. So look out for more support from us, and please get in touch if there's anything that's particularly on your mind. There's probably others who've got the same question. Thanks for your time today. I'll hand back to Laura.
Thank you, Stephen. I can't see any more questions in the chat at this stage. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to get them in. We can always send them to GovRec, so govrec@staterecords.nsw.gov.au, and we're happy to respond. Or obviously, if the Museums of History questions, send them to the Museums of History team. But I want to thank everyone for their time today. Please do stay in touch. We will send out For the Record newsletter in a couple of weeks, which will also have the links to the guidance again and just updates on what we're doing. As we've already said a few times throughout this presentation, the State of Record Keeping report will be published on our website by the end of the week, and scorecards and the verification reports for the participating public officers will go out in the same email to chief executives the following week. All right, thank you again for your time.